What a wonderful morning we've had, and if you weren't inspired by Charles, you mustn't have been listening. He was amazing. I'm Cindy Flower, and I'm a member of the Community of Practice and part of the organising committee for today's forum. I'd like to welcome you to the Ignite Talk sessions, in which we're going to have a wonderful opportunity to hear from entrepreneurs from across a range of industries. So I know that we're at the Entrepreneurs Forum, so we probably know what an entrepreneur is, but I just thought that, I'd check what the actual definition of an entrepreneur is. And it talks about an entrepreneur is an inside entrepreneur, or an entrepreneur within a company, who uses entrepreneurial skills and the resources of a company to bring about change. Now that change could be increased profit, increased productivity, new services, new products, or solving an old problem. Entrepreneurs find ways to utilise the resources within a company, and those resources might be user experience, customer surveys, policies, the people within the organisation, the money within the organisation, and the technologies to analyse and understand trends and synthesise those findings to find new opportunities. Entrepreneurs have an aptitude for trying new things. They learn from failure, they are flexible, they think outside the box and work collaboratively to recognise and solve important problems. And I think we heard some of that this morning. We definitely heard that call from Irma this morning to do that. Entrepreneurs demonstrate independent thinking, thrive in uncertainty and relish a challenge. They rally the troops around them by providing clarity, focus, and motivation. As we heard from Charles earlier, one of the biggest challenges for entrepreneurs is dealing with the corporate organisational structures that value bureaucracy, hierarchy, and rules, which can work against an entrepreneurial culture and behaviour. As Charles said this morning, there always seems to be a reason to say no. Serendipity and creativity can be muted by rigidity. Routines, risk aversion, and tight deadlines can whittle away at space and time for idea creation. Add to that a fear of change and a culture that penalises failure, and it's no wonder many entrepreneurs leave their organisations to become entrepreneurs. However, fear not. Today, we are going to showcase 5 examples where systems were softened, generosity was valued, discretionary effort was flowing, and connections overcame all those barriers I just mentioned. They're going to share with us our speakers are going to share with us how they overcame some of these barriers and helped their organisation to prosper, grow, and pivot to create new value and solutions. Our first presentation showcases the South Australian STEM Students Ambassador Program. What would happen if school students were invited into high-level conversations around educational improvement? What if we positioned them alongside us as authentic and valued partners in the teaching and learning process? Currently in her first year at Brighton Secondary School and a keen debater, Lara Tonkin is an avid learner who embraces challenge and seeks out opportunities to collaborate with others. She's been a South Australian STEM Student Ambassador since early 2017, and the program has benefited from her insightful, innovative and inspiring contributions and leadership. Lara is still undecided about what path she'll follow once she has finished school, but whatever she does, she wants to continue working towards positive social change. Jess Maroney joined the South Australian STEM Student Ambassador Program earlier this year as a mentor teacher from Woodside Primary School. Primarily a learner with a natural disposition towards innovation, he is a dedicated and inspiring primary school teacher who works alongside students to design authentic, challenging and engaging learning experiences. Within a short space of time, he and his students have collaborated to rethink and redesign some traditional elements of their schooling experience with outstanding results. And our third speaker on this one is Erin Matthews. Erin works in part partnership with Brenton Wilson to lead the South Australian STEM Student Ambassadors program. In recent years, Erin and her team from the Department for Education's Learning Improvement Division have been working in the innovation space, positioning students as partners in the teaching and learning process. Erin is a deeply committed learner and educator who has had the privilege of working alongside South Australian students, teachers, leaders and parents to drive statewide excellence in public education. This work has led to some phenomenal shifts in the level of engagement, challenge and achievement experienced by students in South Australian Department for Education schools. I'd like to welcome Lara, Jess and Erin to the stage.
I'm imagining a world where the children of our country are seen as equals. Our ideas are taken just as seriously as adults. I'm imagining how much change we could make. I'm imagining how many problems we could help solve. The children of our country are an untapped resource, waiting to be activated. I'm imagining a world where kids are empowered in their learning, a world where we are given the trust and tools to learn and think independently as well as collaboratively with others. Only then will we be given the ability and the voice to contribute and participate in our society, right now and in the future. I'm imagining a world where adults trusted and believed in us. I'm imagining students and teachers working together, shoulder to shoulder, as co-designers in learning. To live in a world like this, we need to spark learning conversations between adults and young people. These conversations have started in my classroom and many others and are helping to drive teaching and learning improvement across our state.
December 2013 saw the completion of a 4-year pedagogical research project carried out across South Australian public schools by the then Department for Education and Child Development. This research coincided with the introduction of the South Australian Teaching for Effective Learning framework, an aspirational, statewide teaching and learning framework. We had the perfect opportunity as an organisation to gather baseline data about the link between teacher practice and student engagement and achievement. The nature of this research, it's important to mention, was investigative rather than evaluative. Our findings at the completion of those 4 years showed consistently that South Australian teachers care about their students and they work hard, very hard. It also showed that on the whole, our kids feel happy and safe at school. But alongside these findings, some key challenges began to emerge. We found that in our efforts as teachers to maintain student safety and happiness, we were inadvertently displaying unconscious low expectations. We were trying to prevent students from ever feeling any discomfort, but in doing so, avoiding the challenge and the intellectual rigour that leads to transformational learning. We called this, in our findings, high relational support and low cognitive demand. It also became evident that the dominant DNA of our teacher identity is as a knower and a teller, where learning is seen simply as the transmission of knowledge from teacher to student, where getting through the content and knowing the stuff is valued over the process involved, the thinking, the deep conceptual understanding and the actual experience of the learning. Many of us in the room would have experienced schooling and been there and can probably relate to some of what I've just said then. As part of our research, extensive consultation took place in 37 Department for Education local partnerships or groups of schools across South Australia, using the Teaching for Effective Learning Compass online student feedback tool. This data surfaced 4 consistent key messages about what our students would like to see happen in their learning. I'll just let you have a read of those. we were quickly able to see the connection between our underlying assumptions, beliefs and actions as teachers and what our students were saying. So Jess is going to share some of his own insights about this as a classroom teacher during this time.
As a teacher, I guess some of the traditional approaches to teaching used to involve dictating learning to students. When I was planning, I'd sit down in isolation. If I was really lucky, I'd be able to collaborate with a colleague, but we would plan what we thought the students wanted to learn. We played a really dangerous guessing game, and that was guessing what the students needed, but we're also guessing what might engage them. And if I'm completely honest, so often we guessed wrong. It was really clear that we did have to change, but in a really traditional workforce, change is pretty hard, and change is often scary. So in the classroom that most of us sat in, teachers held all of the power. The teachers held the control, and a teacher knew everything. A teacher was the expert and could never be wrong. Many of you would recognise a classroom like this. Desks were in rows, if you were lucky, maybe groups, and the teacher stood and delivered the content. We maintained the underlying assumption that students were empty vessels, just waiting to be filled with knowledge.
As an organisation, this is where our next opportunity came along. We now had a systemic imperative to respond to the emerging patterns and challenges from our statewide research. So we developed a hypothesis informed by state, national and international research findings. And our hypothesis was, if we activate student voice, will we see an acceleration in teaching and learning improvement? Now, as Jess mentioned before, in an organisation with quite traditional values and practices, this concept in itself was significantly risky. This was going to be about challenging those deeply held beliefs, that DNA of a teacher as a teller and as a knower. So we knew that we needed to get some practices thrown up pretty quickly to our system to highlight the difference that this was going to make. And there would be different levels of readiness. Teacher identity in traditional practice is a big rock to shift. So we went with a scalable approach. We started small and we scaled out. So we started with those schools that we knew were already at least 5 years down the track in some of this work and some of this thinking. And we asked them to be our forward scouts in this work. So we started with innovative leaders, prepared to take risks and challenge the status quo. We then asked them to engage other leaders and bring them on board in their local partnerships, and then share their learnings and their collective experiences at statewide professional learning events. These forward scouts were what we called our challenge with the appropriate support. They would have an all-in approach with the expectation that students, teachers, local community would be all in together, and they would go at a suitable pace for everyone to understand the learning and for the change to be successful and embedded. At the completion of this 3 years of working with these forward scouts, we saw some huge shifts. The work itself resulted in high levels of student engagement, an increase in intellectual demand experienced by our learners, improvements in higher order learning and achievement, and these are now driving our statewide approach as an education system. We now have statewide strategies with deliberate embedded student voice. We had a nuclear fuel cycle student forum with the then Premier Jay Weatherall. We have an Aboriginal STEM Congress and a STEM Student Ambassadors program, both within our STEM strategy across our department. We have students being consulted around the new languages strategy and the new music strategy as well. So we've effectively gone from 8 schools as our forward scouts to a statewide strategy. But what has this actually meant in terms of a systemic reimagining of teacher identity?
Well, as part of this process, I now know that the empty vessel concept is far from accurate. My students, they bring so much to learning. They're filled with experiences, they're filled with prior knowledge, and they're independent thinkers. When we give them the chance, they contribute a level of thought and insight far beyond what we as teachers would imagine. What I now do is I involve students in the entire process of learning design. No longer do I sit in isolation. When I plan units of work, I'll sit shoulder to shoulder with students, and we draw on their expertise. I ask my students to guide me into finding out what they already know, what they want to know, and then what they want to find out. And as a teacher, I guess this has taught me that it's imperative to trust students. Students of all ages, and we do this with 5-year-olds right through to senior secondary, students have proven that they're not only effective co-designers, they're also co-facilitators. They understand how students learn. And if we want the best outcomes for our young people, it's imperative that we listen to their voices. So I guess, in theory it sounds great, but what does it look like in practice? What does this shift in teacher practice actually look like? And here's an example from our school up at Woodside. Our school's always been really proud on the fact that we'll take students out of school on camps. And I love going on camps, but I've always hated the fact that we miss an opportunity. So at school, our camps were traditionally, sightseeing holidays. We'd pick a pretty place, we'd go, and it's great. They get to meet each other, they get to hang out, we get to meet our students on a personal level. However, it was an opportunity missed. So after sitting down with a group of students, we explored the nature and the potential and the purpose of school camps. And what we see them as now is study trips. So rather than going to a pretty location, hanging out with the peers, getting to know the teacher and the student on a personal level, we take the classroom for 4 days and we transform it somewhere off-site for a study tour. Places like this, underground Naracoorte Caves. Through co-designing and co-planning with students, the study tours focus on learning rather than just activity. And this camp was only a few weeks ago, and this was a real clincher for me that it worked. We were down in the Victoria Fossil Caves, really beautiful cave down in Naracoorte, and there was real-life paleontologists down there doing a fossil dig. And I was down there chatting with a paleontologist, and they overheard one of these 12-year-old students that was looking at the stalactites say, check out those speleothems. And the paleontologist had a look up at the kid and then looked over at me and said, what did she just say? And we called her over and she just said, I was just checking out the speleothems up there. And as a teacher, I knew what a speleothem was because I researched it before we went. But what 12-year-old student in a regular classroom would say, check out those speleothems? So as a mentor in this program, in the STEM Student Ambassador Project, I realise now more than ever that we must intentionally challenge the way that we think and the way that we act as educators. We have to work collectively with students and across our system. We have to genuinely acknowledge the value and we have to respond to what our young people bring. Not just what they bring as learners, but as capable, active and informed citizens. I've known at times that what I've been doing hasn't been working as well as it could. And Erin mentioned that teachers work hard, and they do. But sometimes we just don't quite hit the mark. So I've been searching for an avenue to change the nature and the purpose of schooling. And what I now know is that these students are the change agents that we've been desperately looking for. Students like Lara have profound ideas, valuable opinions, and even more importantly, they are the experts in how students learn. So if we authentically involve our young people as partners in learning, the potential for our future society is beyond what we might currently imagine. And initially the shift of mindset was pretty scary, but it's now not as scary as it once was. It is happening now, and it's having great impact across our statewide education system. Together, we're enabling the kidpreneurs, the intrapreneurs, and the entrepreneurs of our present and future society.
So as you can hear from what Jess just described, this is not a hands-off approach for us as teachers. In fact, we play a key role, and it's our deliberate, intentional and responsive practices that actually enable students to authentically and meaningfully engage in student voice for learning. And this is actually where the big identity shift is. Because if as a teacher I've always known myself to be the one to be in control, I've identified myself as the one in there controlling the conversation, controlling the learning, the one who knows all the stuff and how I imagine what learning should be about, I'm now having to reimagine what my role is. And it's challenging. And so once again, this is where we say, start small. Because even the littlest tweak to your current practice or the way you think about your learners is going to start making a difference. And we know this is worth sticking with. And we're going to finish by hearing about, for Lara, what it's meant for her as a learner and what her experiences are now as part of our public education system.
I now view my teachers as partners and facilitators of my learning. They are there to work alongside me and help me develop the tools, skills and knowledge necessary to make a positive change in society. From my perspective, working shoulder to shoulder with adults has enabled me to grow as a learner. It has stretched my thinking and my own perceived limits of my brain. As an active citizen, I am now more confident in sharing my ideas and insights with the local community. I would love to see all adults, regardless of their background or position, seeking and responding to the ideas and insights of young people. Believe in us, involve us, trust us, and don't underestimate us. Give us the power and confidence to take control of our learning. Given the opportunity, we can and will go on to do great things together. Thank you.
Wow, that was amazing. Thank you, guys. Again, one of those really tough ones to summarise into a minute, but I was keeping my ear out because, first of all, I wanted to say thank you for being so honest and vulnerable in your learning experience today. But secondly, I heard how this is a great example of using trends and opinions and people's experiences to find that opportunity to leverage teachers' high care factor and the students' potential and desires and vision. I think we can all say that those 4 messages that we heard from the students, I think we've probably all heard in the workplace too. And so I loved how you took a scalable approach and hunted out your future scouts to help develop the curriculum for the future and learn how to trust students. And I also love the fact that you flipped the model on its head and took the expertism from the teacher to the student. We have a few minutes to take some questions. There are a couple of microphones in the room, so if you'd like to ask a question, can you please go to a microphone? It'd be lovely if you had a question.
You've talked about, thank you very much for really interesting insights into your innovation. You've talked about it being scaled up, very wide scale. Can you just explain a little bit more about what that means in terms of how many children out there in public schools today would be experiencing this type of approach?
Thank you. So currently in the STEM Ambassadors program, which is part of a statewide strategy at the moment, we have over 700 students across the state who are involved in that particular program. We have over 70 teachers and leaders involved. So in terms of that starting small, we put an expectation on it that the schools or the leaders that we have involved will actually involve the schools around their local area and their leaders and other students. And so it's starting that small bit and then gradually building, so that we're hoping by, particularly in terms of this program, by the end of or the beginning of 2020, we've actually got significant cohorts within each of the South Australian local partnerships to actually lead this work. So it's part of the expectation of, okay, you're in, but you are leaders in this work. So, thank you.
Firstly, thank you very much for the presentation. It was really good. I don't know too much about how South Australia does education, but up in Sydney, I know we have been making a lot of changes with learning, but not many changes in assessment and how we test students' knowledge. Is there, I don't know, is there a way that you guys have found out to sort of, I guess, make assessments catch up with how we develop learning?
Question. I know that within our current strategies in our department, we have a learning design assessment and moderation strategy, and within that we have students involved in that process. So we have students as collaborators in the moderation process, in the assessment process, and we are particularly focused on involving students in understanding and designing a purposeful assessment, purposeful and meaningful assessment, and looking at ways of providing both formative assessment, which is particularly important, we know in the learning process, crucial in fact, providing opportunities for the formative assessment along the way for students to constantly check in. So as teachers, we're checking in and acting and responding to what's emerging in the learning. As well as the summative assessment pieces as well. So we're certainly focusing on how we involve our students to look at the purpose and the design of our assessment across our state.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I just had a follow-on from that question. Hi, my name's Georgia. Great presentation, thank you so much. When it comes to learning in year 11 and 12, say standard is nationwide to compare across universities and get your ATAR and all of that. How does that work in with what you're trying to do?
That's tough, because that's out of my realms as a primary school teacher.
Yeah, that's a really great question, because one of the things that we quite often come up against, and in fact we're having a discussion with my executive director, Margot Foster, sitting down here this morning, we were talking about the difficulty. It's about being able to hold that innovation space, hold the space for innovation, whilst constantly being able to feed up the demands of our broader system. And it's hard. And we know that we've got teachers constantly trying to innovate upon what they perceive to be quite, restrictive processes and demands on them, particularly in terms of the later years of high school and assessment. So, I think what we've seen is through this work, this is really opening up the conversation at those other levels around how we can look at those structures and how they can make the space for this work to happen, because we know it's important and we know it's working, but at the moment it is a tension. It absolutely is. So, yeah, watch this space.
Thank you. Very good presentation today. I suppose it's a bit of a follow-up and a flip side to one of the previous questions. I think one of the questions was around how do you get assessment to catch up in terms of the way we measure students, but I think from the teacher's perspective, how do we ensure that teachers with Jess's type of thinking, the new way of teaching, if you like, are actually embedded into the system? How do we make sure that they've got those capabilities up front so that the next wave of teachers, this will be the norm? Just wondering if you can provide any insights into that.
And that is a tough one, because, teachers, you're dealing with people. And I guess my perspective on it is that my role now is to mentor other teachers. So I'm in working with the students, and if we're using the students as the change agents, we have them going in and doing the co-facilitating. So I guess we've got, and I know Margot can probably speak a bit more about this, but the early career teacher program, there's a lot more support and scaffolding for early career teachers now. But it's really important for teachers like myself that have this line of thinking to get in and not just do it in isolation. So take the students with me, get into other people's classes and ensure that this work is happening across the board.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation, and I know that we're in safe hands. Thank you.